start with an apology. You raised questions yesterday, Mr. Chairperson, about the bundles. We could only get to talk to the correct people this morning. They are working on them, and they tell me they will need another half hour. So I'm going to please ask if we could start just after 10:30. The bundles will then be in the order that you have suggested, and which obviously would allow us to proceed expeditiously.
Okay, all right. So should we aim for resuming 10:30 or 11?
Chairperson, may I suggest 11:45, but if it's earlier, we'll give you a shot. Yes.
Okay, all right. I see there are lights that have been put in, but certainly that one is too bright. I hope the technicians, I think there might be lights.
I can say to you, Mr. Chairperson, from here, that the lights here look okay, but you look like something in the dark, if I can put it that way. Yeah. I don't know, we will try and deal with that as well.
I think that one at the top was working well, but from what I've been told, it might be that it only works under certain circumstances. You can see when there's an emergency or something. It may be that they need to see whether they can position that one where it's not going to be so bright. I don't know exactly how they should do it, but they'll have a look at that. I don't know about this one to people that side whether it was fine.
Yes,
this one wasn't there yesterday.
It wasn't there, yes.
Yeah, how is it fine?
Yes.
It is fine. So I think it's just that one. Maybe that's part of the problem that seems to play something directly. And maybe if it is somewhere there that doesn't face me directly, it might be fine. I'm not sure. They just have
It's been whispered in my ear, Mr. Chairperson, that they will adjust it. They've heard what you've said, and they will adjust it.
Yes. Okay, no, that's fine. So we'll step down the until 11:15, unless you let me know earlier that we can resume 11, in which case we will then resume 11.
All right.
Inspector's report, is it not a separate exhibit on its own?
It is, in fact, it is in a separate, entirely separate file.
Yeah, it's a separate exhibit, yeah.
Yes.
Okay, okay.
And then there's Mr. Molefe, Bundle D is Mr. Molefe's affidavit together with the annexures. Bundle E is Ms. Ngoyi's, two of Mrs. Ngoyi's affidavits with the annexures.
Yeah.
And then Bundle F are the affidavits together with the annexures of the rest of the witnesses, namely Mr. Ahmed, Mr. Dingizwayo, Ms. Kwayama, Mr. Holele, Mr. Akwato, and Mr. Muller.
Okay, no, that's fine. I think we just also need to emphasize that although on the spine of these files, there will appear exhibit numbers, the exhibit numbers don't refer to the file, they refer to the documents inside the file. Yes. Okay, all right.
And we will refine it so that references that you look at will tell you exactly what is in that file. So yes. Whatever is there, we will refine to some extent.
Okay, thank you.
Chairperson, before we continue, I'm told that light has been adjusted.
There is some improvement in terms of the lighting. It's just that it's not enough, and that light is not facing me the way it was before.
Yes.
I wonder whether these ones work or whether when they are on, they cause any problems, because I see right at the back there with the lights on the ceiling, it looks quite well. The lighting seems quite fine. Well, those responsible do hear what I have to say. Maybe they are not working, but let's continue in the meantime. I'm sure at some stage we'll have perfect lighting.
Mr. Chairperson, before we continue with the evidence of Mr. Molefe, we are constrained to place a matter on record because it has emerged in the public space. Apparently, Minister Fikile Mbalula was on radio this morning complaining that he hadn't received the affidavits in which comments are made about the dismissal of Ms. Kwayama's board. Mr. Chairperson, I have been told, and I have proof here, that in respect of Ms. Kwayama's affidavit, that affidavit was in fact served on Mr. Mbalula through an email address which the Commission has used previously and about which there have been no complaints. The same applies to Mr. Ahmed's affidavit. And the same applies to Ms. Ngoyi's affidavit. So they were all served on him. And I could just say, Chairperson, that in addition to the normal address, one of the investigators looked if there was an additional address. And after the affidavit of Ms. Kwayama was served on him.
Is it not Kwayama?
Kwayama.
Kwayama, yeah, yes. I think it is, yeah.
Yes. After that affidavit was served, Mr. Chairperson, the further two affidavits, namely that of Mr. Ngoyi and Mr. Ahmed, were served on a second address as well. Now, at the end of the day, Mr. Chairperson, we do not want to be sidetracked from the matter. There has been a communication between the Commission and the Ministry's office, and all the affidavits that were served on that address were forwarded to the Ministry, and they appear to have confirmed that at least this morning they had received them.
Okay, thank you. Yes, you may proceed. Mr. Molefe, the oath you took yesterday will continue to apply. You accept that? Thank you.
Mr. Molefe.
And I think you may keep your mic on. I've been told that that should be fine.
Mr. Molefe, yesterday we interrupted your evidence at the point where...
I'm sorry, Mr. Soni.
Yes.
I just mentioned in case anybody has something to say. I propose that since we have had this delay, we don't take any tea break. We go straight up to lunchtime. Mr. Molefe, would that be fine with you? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, maybe I should have flashed that on record. Sorry, Mr. Chair.
Yes, no, that's fine.
Now, the topic before which we stopped is in your affidavit dealt with as your early days at PRASA. You remember that?
That is correct, Chairperson.
Now, would you tell the Chair very briefly what your experiences were about the time you were appointed as the Chair of the Board? If you could tell us when you were appointed and so on.
Chairperson, I was appointed on the 1st of August 2014. Other directors were also appointed at the same time. I must hasten to say that I was not involved in their nomination per se. Now, once we have been confirmed as the board of directors, the first thing I did was to meet with the group CEO of PRASA, Mr. Lucky Montana, who generously congratulated me on my appointment. He told me a bit about what a great leader I was. He followed my struggle, track record, and he mentioned more specifically the Delmas treason trial, which involved the leaders of the United Democratic Front, a front organization for which I was the general secretary at the time of the trial. And it was held at Delmas. It came to be known as the Delmas treason trial, and I think it was Delmas 1.
Sorry, Mr. Molefe, just for the record, you were one of the accused in the trial.
I was one of the accused in the trial. It was not an easy trial. I had to give evidence for 4 weeks, in the witness stand for 4 weeks.
Yes, and that was during apartheid.
That is correct.
Just so that whoever may read this transcript, your evidence 10 years, 20 years from now, they shouldn't think it was under democracy.
That is correct, Chairperson. Yeah. In fact, the fundamental demand of the United Democratic Front was that we needed an inclusive and democratic constitution which provided for universal suffrage, a right that was excluded by the constitution under the apartheid government. So in response to Mr. Montana's generous congratulations, and at the same time, of course, as he was congratulating me, he informed me that he had been in PRASA for a long time. He had previously advised the previous chairperson of PRASA and the board that he intended not to renew his contract when it ended.
Sorry, can I just for record, I'm not wanting to interrupt you. When you say the previous chairperson of the board, who was that?
The previous chairperson of the board at that point had been Mr. Sifiso Buthelezi. I think he's currently one of the ministers in the current government, deputy ministers in the current government.
Yes, you were saying in response. Yeah, you were saying in response to
in response to what Mr. Montana said to me, I said, well, you know, we come in at a time when PRASA is undertaking carrying out a major program of modernization, and therefore the new board would need you to stay on and provide leadership to the management team as we proceed to execute this important program. And we got in there saying what we said, understanding that in the first instance our commitment as the directors was to support the executive management team, who were essentially the operational people in the business.
And just in brief, Mr. Molefe, what did that modernization program involve? What period would it take, and what was the amount that would be eventually spent?
The modernization program, Chairperson, was a program intended to revitalize the rail system in South Africa, which had suffered a neglect of over 40 years, where there was no capitalization, both in terms of its infrastructure as well as the locomotives and the coaches for trains. For a long time, PRASA was relying on attempts to fix particularly the metro rail, which was failing all the time. Another element of modernization included the installation and rollout of signaling systems. And in this regard, there were essentially three major contracts. One rolled out in KwaZulu-Natal, led by a Canadian company called Bombardier Transport. In the Western Cape, it was Thales Africa with a black partner there. And then here in the Gauteng province, it was Siemens, where the main nerve center for command and control was established in, I think, in Braamfontein. So that was the modernization program, but it would have also entailed manufacturing of new locomotives, the trains, new trains, state-of-the-art trains. 20 of each were initially to be procured from Brazil and here in South Africa, in order to ensure that this procurement leads to creation of jobs and it stimulates growth in the economy. A factory was to be built in a place called Denota in Niger. Various railway stations were to be renovated. A lot of expenditure had to go in it. And because new trains were going to be procured, it was critical that there should be depots that were modernized, and the key ones, I think there was one in Braamfontein around the corner here, one was Walmartin, and then there would be one in the Western Cape. All of those involved a lot of investment. Overall, the program of modernization was estimated to cost 172 billion rand over 40 years. So it is this kind of a program that PRASA had to implement, and the board of control of PRASA had to exercise oversight over.
Sorry, Ms. Molefe, before you go on.
I'm sorry, Mr. Sonny, you might have to raise your voice. I'm just wanting to make sure everybody can hear everybody. Yeah. Okay.
These were quite ambitious programs and so on. Who had devised those programs? Was it your board, or was it your board that was going to, had inherited these programs, if I can call it that?
Chairperson, indeed, these were ambitious and exciting program, and this is precisely for that reason that we found being on the board of PRASA at that historic moment to have been very attractive. Now, who designed them? This was a decision taken by the cabinet of the Republic of South Africa, and I must say that, Chairperson, it was not only about PRASA. It included also Transnet, which became a separate logistics business after the unbundling of the previous structure of the government. So it was a government program.
Now, you mentioned a number of programs. At the time the board took over or assumed office, what was the state of the contracts in relation to this the first phase of the modernization program?
Most, if not all, Chairperson, the contracts had already been concluded, signed with various original equipment manufacturers as well as other service providers. I've indicated those that were rolling out signaling systems. Those contracts had already been concluded. And to be more specific, with regard to the locomotives, a contract had been concluded with a company called Sifambo, which was a South African company, which later was to partner with Vosloo. I say later advisedly because at the time when this contract was awarded, Sifambo, which had no experience in rail, either leasing or operation, did not have a subcontract with Volso, which had the capacity to manufacture the locomotives.
And as far as the board was concerned, what steps did it take in relation to those contracts?
As a new board, Chairperson, in order for us to exercise a proper oversight, we felt duty-bound to ask for detailed presentation on the contract by the Group CEO and his executive team. But we also then requested the actual contract so that we could see precisely what the company was committing itself to, what obligations we had in respect of those contracts.
Now,
I'm sorry. Are you able to give an indication as to how much, in terms of that 170-something billion rand over 40 years, that was estimated to be required for the whole modernization program? Are you able to indicate about how much, what percentage of that maybe was anticipated to be used in the next 10 years or so from the time that the program started, or from the time when your board came in? Are you able to give an indication whether it was 10% of that, 5% of that over the next X number of years?
Chairperson, I might not specifically be able to say 10%, but I know that over I think the first 10 years or so,
Yeah.
the amount of money to be spent was 51 billion rand.
Okay. Okay. No, that's helpful. Thank you.
Now, you say that the contracts had already been concluded, and you asked the then CEO to explain matters to you and make detailed presentations. Were those made?
The presentations were made in respect of the briefings that the board had requested. But to the extent that the board of control required the actual contracts in terms of which these locomotives, particularly, and the trains that were going to be built, called the Gibela consortium, led by a company called Alstom, those were not given to the board. The board had to, in fact, I led that, to go to the companies that at the time we had been advised were the ones who advised PRASA on the contract. They drafted the contracts and advised them on the signing thereof. My recollection is that the company in question at the time was Weber Wenzel.
That's the legal firm.
The legal firm that was external legal firm advising PRASA.
Well, I'm sorry, you say the contracts were not provided to the board, I assume, by the group CEO.
That is correct.
But did he give a reason? Did he refuse, or did he just not provide without refusing? And if so, didn't the board say, hey, we asked for the contracts, what's happening? Where are the contracts?
Meeting after meeting, Chairperson, the GCE, Group CEO, was reminded that the board needed those contracts. They were not forthcoming.
But he was also not flatly refusing, but he was just not providing.
No, he doesn't say no, but
Yeah.
he doesn't provide.
Yes.
But I must also say that, of course, during that period, now we were moving towards the time when we're beginning to deal with issues pertaining to the public protector, and the fact that he was saying now he's not going to renew his contract.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Are you able to indicate what you think the reason was why, despite the board requesting that these contracts be provided to them and requesting repeatedly, they were not being provided? Or is that something that you are not able to say? It's just strange that Group CEO, who is answerable to the board, is asked to provide very important documents, and over some time they are not provided.
I would be speculating if I were to talk about what the reasons were.
Yes.
All I can say is that
they were not provided.
They were not provided.
Yes.
And when we initiated engagements with the firm of lawyers that did the contracts,
yes,
we spent time with them presenting to us. The group CEO was very angry that we went directly to those lawyers to ask for those contracts.
Yes.
Because we didn't stop there. We even said, well, we will also ask the CEO of the company that is manufacturing the trains to also come and present to us. At that time was a man called Mr. Granger, Mark Granger.
Yes. Yes.
I don't know why he was unhappy with what the board wanted.
Yes.
But that was the position.
Yeah. And the board only went to other sources, other parties, when the group CEO had failed over some time to finish the contracts to the board.
That is correct, Chairperson.
Yes, okay, thank you.
Just to take up something that the chairperson has raised, you understand what prompts that series of questions. You are the board, the CEO reports to you. You come in with these multi-billion rand contracts on the table, as it were. You ask for the contracts and you're not providing. And you understand the cloud that hangs over that issue.
Well, I do understand the cloud that hangs over the issue, Chairperson, but I would imagine that at the appropriate time in the course of this evidence, we will deal with that.
Yes.
But what was strange, Chairperson, was that with this particular state-owned company, the board of directors didn't seem to immediately at that stage to have the kind of relationship where the group CEO understands that when the board requires something, which you know you have or you know where to find, you go get it and give it to the board as per its request. I think it's an issue about what was the understanding of the power relations between the group CEO and the board. Was it a situation of dual power, or was the CEO understanding that he reports to the board? So these are issues that are anomalous when you compare with the private companies or public companies with their board of directors.
Well, of course, you will continue with your evidence, and maybe by the end of your evidence, more light or perspectives will emerge. It's just that it seems strange to me, because my expectation, and maybe the expectation of many people, would be that when there is a new board, whether it's a private sector or parastatal, the current group CEO would actually offer to the board, to the chairperson, say, I and my team will be ready as soon as you are ready for us to present to you and give you a full picture of what is happening in at the moment in the company. And then the chairperson would in due course say, that's the date, come and brief us fully. So obviously the board would want to know what commitments, important commitments, does the company have? And if you have a program such as the Modernization program, obviously the board would want to know, would want to see the contracts and have a full picture. So that's my expectation, and that's why maybe I asked you the questions that I asked you in regard to a situation where the group CEO knows you are new as a board in this entity, and you specifically ask for documents, and they are not provided until you have to go outside of the company. So I thought I'd just mention that context.
Chairperson, in the normal course of events in a normal company, that's what happens. But I want to separate what we would call the induction of the board from the contracts that I'm talking about.
Yes.
The process of induction did take place.
Yes.
And the group CEO, Mr. Montana, together with his executive team, led that process.
Yes.
Where we could not understand failures on his part was when we wanted now to see the actual contracts, because as a board of directors, it is well and good to say, yes, management have given presentations, they told us what the program of modernization entails and what is its status, what are the critical elements thereof. But you would still want to know, what do the contracts commit us to as a board of directors?
Yes, not definitely, particularly when you're talking about big amounts. You, as the board, you should want to see that. Thank you, Mr. Sono.
As you please, Mr. Chairperson. And especially given the fact that in terms of the PFMA, the board is the accounting authority.
That is correct, Chairperson. The board is the accounting authority. We can't say to the executive authority, that is the shareholder, and to the legislature to which we have to account, that no, we can't account because management did not give us a report, didn't give us a contract. We are obliged in terms of the Public Finance Management Act to exercise fiduciary duty, to exercise the duty of care and diligence as we deal with these matters.
Now, a point you made in relation to the power relations and so on is, it appears to have been quite a fluid situation, because you then talk about a challenge that faced the board in regard to the audit report. Could you tell the chairperson about that?
Chairperson, by September 2014, which is the time at which the final audit and the annual report should have been concluded and actually tabled in Parliament by the minister, subsequent to which the board would be required to appear before Parliament to answer questions. PRASA at that time was not ready. There were many queries from the Auditor General regarding that matter, and I recall pretty well that by September 2014, which is really just a month after I had been appointed chairman of the board, I was invited by the group chief executive to attend 2 events in Europe. The first one was MAFEX, which was a conference of rail organizations, and that one was held in Madrid. And the second one was the biannual global and the biggest exhibition, rail exhibition, that one being organized and hosted by Deutsche Bahn, which is a German rail organization. So I was invited to that. The GCE and I, Group Chief Executive Officer, and I had to return hurriedly because the annual financials had not been concluded. And we had to go back quickly to engage the Auditor General's team, management, to try and get the finances in order.
So you had, both of you had already left and you had to come back?
Yeah, but to clarify matters,
yes.
The chairperson, the group CEO, would have known that the financials had not been concluded. It's not like we only discovered when we were out of the country, but we were saying we can't stay longer because we've got to go back and get our house in order.
Yes. Okay, all right. Before you proceed, I just want us to conclude the issue of you or your board trying to get the contracts. You spoke to Weber Wenzel, they did a presentation, and I think you said somebody else did a presentation. Ultimately, were you able to have copies of all the contracts that you wanted?
We never got the contracts to be given to us, but it was through our consent. They said they had given PRASA the contract, but what they had was their own copy. And we were satisfied, having spent like half a day with them, discussing those contracts and getting them to present to us, that we had the assurance that this big firm of lawyers had done the correct job. They have done the best they could to protect the interests of PRASA. Actually, the person who was leading these negotiations and the drafting of the contract was an experienced experienced lawyer who had worked in rail in the UK and other parts of the world. He understood the complexities of these contracts.
So, but are you saying that they did a presentation but didn't give you, as the board, copies of the contracts?
We didn't take copies of the contract. We accepted that if we want them, we can go and get them at the firm of attorneys here.
Okay. But did you get to know, like, how many contracts had been concluded, with whom they had been concluded, and what the value of each one was, all of that? Maybe through the presentation?
In respect of these contracts, I think our main focus was on and I must come back to this point, was on the 51 billion rand, which was being allocated for the manufacturing of the new trains. I should have indicated that the procurement of the locomotives was outside the 51 billion rand, because that one was in the region of 3.4 billion rand.
Yes. Okay. So, would it then be correct for me to conclude from your evidence that after Weber Wenzel had made their presentations, you were satisfied that their presentations had included telling you all the contracts that they were telling you about, all the contracts that they were aware of relating to PRASA, in which they had drafted, but you are not sure as to how many contracts there had been that had been concluded that fell under the modernization program already. And I accept that you might not be wanting to see every small contracts. You would be interested in big ones. Yeah. But would it be fair to make that conclusion or not really?
It would be fair to say, Chairperson, that we did not know about the rest of the contract. And I must hasten to say, whereas Weber Wenzel advised PRASA on the Gibela program, the manufacturing of the trains, they did not seem to have been involved in any other contracts. The rest of the contracts were done by different
law firms,
small ones,
okay.
and so on.
Okay. Yeah. So the one on which they had been involved was the Gibela. Did you say Gibela? Gibela. That's the 51 billion rand one?
That is the 51 billion.
Okay, thank you.
I'm just asked to conclude in relation to the presentation by Weber Wenzel. Was the CEO, Mr. Montana, present at that presentation?
No, he was not. He was not, because at that stage it was already clear to us that he was not keen to share with the board all information that the board required. And if I remember well, at that time he was not even in the office of, at the office of the company when the board wanted that presentation.
So would it be correct to then say that as far as you are concerned, by the time of the presentation that was made by Weber Wenzel to your board, it was clear to you that Mr. Montana's failure to provide the board with contracts was based on his unpreparedness to provide the board. It was not anything else. He was simply not prepared to provide them. Or, or is that being unfair to him?
There could be two reasons. But he didn't even need to be prepared. Or preparedness means unwilling.
Preparedness means unwilling, yes.
Yeah, it could be that he was unwilling. Secondly, it could be that he felt, but you are the board of directors. Why? This is an operational matter. Why do you interfere? And that probably would explain why he made a big issue of the fact that the board went and met with the firm of attorneys that was advising PRASA. Ordinarily, you would have said, okay, you have seen them. Well, we hope that now you understand the program better than before. Yeah. But that was not the attitude of the group CEO.
Well, it seems to me that you said it could be one of two reasons. It seems to me that in either case, it's unwillingness to say this. He is not prepared, was not prepared. At least that's how you saw it. That's what I want to confirm, that's how you saw it, that he was unprepared to give these contracts or share some other information with the board that the board wanted. And when you look at why he might not have wanted to share the information, then it may be that he thought it's operational and the board should have nothing to do with it. Would that be a fair summary of what you thought by the time of the presentation?
That is correct, Chairperson. Okay. I may also want to locate it within the context of other developments at the time.
Yes.
I think we would probably return to this matter later in the evidence.
Yes.
Two things had happened. It was a disagreement we had with the group CEO regarding the contracts that they had awarded in respect of the Braamfontein depot modernization, the rail and turnouts procurement. It is also part of the evidence later on. The second one was the fact that we raised issue with having to hear from the media that PRASA had been given an interim report which included a number of questions that the company had to respond to, and it came from the public protector, which the board was not presented with. And this now the situation around March when we still asking for that report. And it is at that time, after these two events happened, 27 November 2014, and this matter of the public protector's interim report, which I had discussed with the group CEO, that at that point in time he says, I'm not renewing my contract. Yeah. But I'm happy to serve 6 months to whilst you are searching for a new group CEO. But the attitude that time also changes, as we will show in the evidence, that increasingly the board was getting an indication that the GCO for that period, Group Chief Executive Officer for that period, Mr. Montana, did not consider himself fully accountable to the board. He actually was beginning to question the integrity and the validity of the appointment of the board. And one of the key issues he raised in his many complaints was that he was not consulted when the new board was appointed.
Well, I just want to make sure, with regard to the two developments that you have talked about, I just want to make sure that that they happened before the Weber-Wenzel presentation, because my question was more on the question of what you understood or thought to be the position as far as the Group CEO was concerned at that time. Did the two events or developments happen before the Weber-Wenzel presentation or after?
Well, certainly the first event of November, but I do believe that the second one also happened before the Weber-Wenzel engagement, because it took time for us waiting for the contract.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Now, in your affidavit, you say, Ms. Molefe, that there were two worrying aspects in regard to the audit state of PRASA, and you referred to two separate amounts, and you annexed the audit report. Do you want to deal with that quickly?
Chairperson, the audit report of the year 2014-2015 by the Auditor General recorded that there was an irregular expenditure of over 500 million, which 500 million, which in precise terms, I think it was 550 million. And queries arising out of the report projected also that the following financial year, the irregular expenditure would be in the region of 8 billion rand. The response of the board was to direct the Audit and Risk Committee to have a special workshop that was going to interrogate what went wrong, to assess what could be done to fix these wrongs. The conclusions of the Audit and Risk Committee was that literally all the departments of PRASA, especially the finance function, were dysfunctional. And that the people in those positions did not have requisite skills, and therefore they were unable to discharge their responsibilities as they were required. But also, the Audit and Risk Committee didn't only talk about dysfunctional, it emphasized the fact that there were no controls as well within the organization. Fundamentally, what it meant was that they were saying this organization is broken. A lot of work has to be done to fix it.
This was now the risk, the Audit and Risk Committee of your board.
That is correct.
And there would have been an Audit and Risk Committee under the previous board. Did you get to understand from the report of the Audit and Risk Committee under your board that these findings they were making, namely that there were no controls, reflected that there had been no controls for quite some time, or that this was a new thing? I'm trying to see whether somebody hadn't done their job for some time, and that's why there were these challenges, or whether it was something new?
I, at this stage, would not be privy to what recall. The previous audit and risk committee, the one before my board, had found.
Yes.
But I am aware, it's something I want to steer clear of, that in the course of the investigations conducted on the malfeasances within PRASA, it was clear that some members of the board had raised red flags about certain contracts, and one of those was this one of the locomotives, even before we came in. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Just, Mr. Molefe, just to attempt to tie in the annexures with the evidence you've led, you refer, in regard to those two amounts, you refer to the 500 million rand in paragraph 16 and then the 8 billion rand. Can I just ask you to look at PM2 so that the chairperson, when he's looking at the report, would know precisely where to look at? And ask you...
And PM2 would be at page 34, if you look at the red page numbers on the top right, is that correct?
As you please.
Yeah.
PM2.
You might recall from your previous engagements that we don't mention the zero before the number.
Where would be PM? Yeah, but where do I see the P? Oh, okay, thanks.
Okay. Can I ask you to turn to page 38, the 38 being the number on the top?
So you disregard the zero, huh?
I'm on page 38.
38.
Yes.
Okay, all right.
And then
PM2.
Yes. So if you look at paragraph 10, if you could just read that into the record, please.
Maybe, Mr. Son, you can just repeat what this document is first, or you can ask the witness to identify the document.
Yes. First
before
of all,
he reads from it.
Yes. Mr. Molefe, will you please tell the chairperson what this document is, PM2?
Chairperson, PM2 is the Auditor General's report.
That would have been for which financial year?
For 2014-2015 financial year.
Thank you. And then you can read paragraph 10 at page 38.
The relevant paragraph, and I quote Chairperson, reads as follows, and that is paragraph 10, says, as disclosed in the note XX in brackets to the financial statements, the capital commitment for the purchase of rolling stock fleet renewal program is 59.6 billion, which was disclosed under events after reporting date in 2013-2014 annual report as 51 billion rand.
So what is the significance of that in relation to the two figures you've mentioned in paragraph 16 of your affidavit? Remember, you say it was projected to be 8 billion rand more the following year.
Well, what I'm saying, Chairperson, is that if you were add, for example, 8 billion rand to what was reported as 51 billion rand, it would take you to 59 billion. Of course, it has some 600 on the side.
Yes.
So it is this particular aspect that reflects that that amount is not being properly accounted for.
Yes. Is there a suggestion here, as you understand this paragraph, of some misrepresentation that may have been made, or not really? That's not how you understand that paragraph.
What one can surmise that, but what is quite clear, Chairperson, is that there is a disjuncture between what is set out as what the renewal program of the rolling stock would cost to purchase that, and what then is disclosed to the Auditor General. So
yes.
there has not been a full disclosure
yes.
to the Auditor General. That's what
yes.
it means.
Yes, yes. Then whether or not that was intentional, deliberate or not, that might be another matter. But
it's another matter.
Yeah, but what was disclosed was not the correct figure.
That is correct,
Yeah.
Chairperson.
Okay.
And the difference between what was disclosed and what the real figure was 8 billion rand.
That is correct, Chairperson.
Then can I ask you at the bottom of that page, if you could look at paragraph 14, please, Mr. Molefe, and read, what is the heading to that paragraph?
The heading to that paragraph, Chairperson, is irregular expenditure, and it is paragraph 14. And again, if I quote, it says, as disclosed in the note XX in bracket, to the financial statement, the agency incurred irregular expenditure to the amount of 550 million rand, which is what I referred to earlier on, Chairperson. Evidence provided confirmed non-compliance with Section 51, subsection 1, paragraph A, item 3, and Section 51, subsection 1, paragraph B, item 2 of the PFMA and the agency supply chain management policy. So, well, there's no compliance with the PFMA, there's no compliance with our own supply chain policy.
And just for the record, when a reference is made to agency, what is the entity?
The agency, Chairperson, refers to the passenger rail agency known by the acronym PRASA.
All right. Then you say, in addition to this issue of the audit concerns being raised about the audit report by the Auditor General, or in his audit report, you say there were other issues that the board was concerned about. What were those? You refer to them in paragraph 17.
At the time when the board took office, Chairperson, we found that a whole lot of people had either been suspended or dismissed. And the disciplinary procedure of the company was not followed. It was one of the major problems we have. And in fact, 500 employees of a trade union that broke away from the South African trade workers, SATAU, South African Trade Union, Workers Transport and Allied Workers Union.
And you said workers or members of a trade union?
NTM, which is the National Transport Movement. 500 of them had been dismissed.
Members of that union.
Of that union.
Yeah.
The labor court held that their dismissal was irregular and unlawful, and that they needed to be reinstated. Now, this occasioned an enormous problem for the company, because suddenly the company had to find money to pay these people who have not been at work for a long time. They were not receiving their salaries. And the reinstatement meant that the situation had to return to return to what it was before they were suspended. So it was a big problem for the company. And of course, regardless of whether at the time it was the group CEO who made the decision, but he was the ultimate person responsible as the chief of the administrative function of the company.
Do you have, this might be details that you might not remember. Do you remember what kind of figures the back pay for the 500 workers more or less was that the company had to find?
Chairperson, I wouldn't remember
but it was a huge amount as far as
figures. I may just say that when these things were happening, when the reinstatement was happening, it was close to when the term of office of my board was going to end. So we were not able to go into these details. Yes. What I remember is that I met with the leaders of the national transport movement to say, and I must say that we think that we're estimating that it would cost us over in the region of 500 million to reinstate that, but it's an estimation.
Yeah, that was an estimate.
But I met with the leaders of the union to say, hey guys, you understand that the company is in trouble. We have to respect the court judgment, but can't we, as people collectively committed to making sure that the company succeed, agree on negotiating the amounts that the company can afford, maybe over an extended period of time, and they were willing to do so. But of course, I'm not an operational person, and again, our human resources function in the company was very poor, was weak. I never got to know whether that negotiation was pursued and concluded. But of course, if it becomes necessary, I'm sure those leaders I spoke to are there. Yes. And if should the commission require to ask them to confirm what I'm saying, I'm sure they'll be willing to do so.
Yes, and I'm sure the judgment of the court is also available somewhere. Yeah. Okay.
Now, Mr. Molefe, earlier you recall you were saying to the chairperson that there is a difference between the induction of the board and in the substantive meetings that the board had. I'd like you to look at paragraph 18, and you say there that the first substantive meeting of the board was in November. Could you explain to the chairperson how that came about and what happened at that meeting?
I'm very sorry to both of you. Before that question, I wanted to ask something else arising from the previous question. You said that, I think, when your board came in, you found that there were a number of employees who had been suspended or dismissed and so on. Are you able to give me an idea that maybe, although you might not be 100%, what the numbers were that you were talking about, apart from that group of 500? Or is that difficult because it's been quite some time?
My number would not be precise, but
Yes.
I know that there was an executive called Popo Molefe, who also had an extended suspension and legal challenge. The others had simply been moved from where they were to other positions. There was, and some of them were forced to resign. I can't give the exact number of them, and if I want to do that, we would have to go back and try to find something from the records of the company, which I don't have access to.
No, that's fine. I just want to have an idea whether it was something substantial, but I guess it was something enough to cause the board concern as to what the numbers are, but whatever it was, but it was enough to cause you to be concerned.
Well, by the way, Chairperson, from our point of view, it is not so much the numbers.
Yes.
It is the question whether there's been fairness.
Yes.
And compliance with the procedures of the company on how you terminate the employment of your employees.
Yes.
And whether the basis for suspending or removing them was, in our view, valid, justified, that kind of action. And we concluded that in many respects, it did not.
Okay, no, that's fine. The angle from which I was looking at it was, as the board, you might not necessarily want to get involved if there might be one isolated incident, but if there seems to be a number of instances where people are being suspended and dismissed in circumstances that are questionable, as the board, you might say, no, let's try and find out what's happening, as opposed to what may be an isolated case. But I understand what you mean, but I just thought
Chairperson, I must state that there were many.
There were many.
Okay. And I suppose when we go down to at some point with the public protector's report,
you can
this
elaborate.
matter is being raised there again by the public protector.
Okay, no, that's fine.
Then, Mr. Molefe, the first substantive meeting of the board, you say, was held in November 2014. Could you tell us what, or tell the chairperson what happened at that meeting?
I call it the first substantive meeting, Chairperson, because that was the first scheduled meeting of the board, that is outside the induction that had already taken place. That meeting we were required to hold because the amongst others, there would have been other items, but amongst others, the Finance, Capital Investment and Procurement Committee of the board, which is called the FCIP, and in line with the urgency of accelerating the program of modernization and preparing for staging yards for the trains that were being manufactured in Brazil and which were likely to come. We had to make urgent decisions in that regard. Management had awarded, had announced their preferred bidders in respect of, in particular, Braamfontein depot and the matter that pertained to rails and turnouts. Because we are a new board, because we also needed to be seen to have applied our mind on these matters. We looked at the amounts it was in the region of 4 billion, and we said, look, we appreciate the urgency of the matter, which was, of course, presented by the former chairperson of the board, Mr. Sfiso Buthelezi, who had now become the chairperson of the FCIP. We said, give us an assurance that proper process was followed before you awarded to your preferred bidder. Give us the probity report. The probity report was not in the packs of the board. The group CEO, Mr. Montana, said, well, you know that probity report is there. I cannot understand why it is not in the pack, but you will get it. We will give it to you as soon as possible. On the strength of the promise that Mr. Montana made to the board, which was not refuted by the chairperson of the FCIP, we agreed to adopt, to approve the recommendation, but we said it is subject to that probity report being delivered to the chairperson of the board and the chairperson of the risk committee. Them having acquainted themselves with that report will then advise the rest of the directors that we can now go ahead and implement. At that point, we said to management, nobody should go and tell who we are saying are the preferred bidders that they've got this contract, because we must first jump this hurdle. So we waited, chairperson, for that report. It was not forthcoming. Of course, around that time, Mr. Montana had advised me that he felt like he was burnt out. He'd been working very hard. Could he please take a break, which I encouraged, because I could see that he had been running around the country and so on. Then one of the executives, Ms. Martha Ngoy, was appointed to act as the group CEO in the absence of Mr. Montana. Because we did not get the report, I had to call directors who were on holiday to a meeting of the Board of Control, understanding the urgency of this project of depot modernization and rails and tunnels, which are necessary for the maintenance of the rail tracks and so on. We called a meeting on the 23rd of December. That was just 2 days before Christmas. And I must applaud the loyalty of the directors at the time, because they were all willing to come back to consider this matter. At that meeting, Ms. Ngoy said, actually, there's no probity report. It could never have been there, because the probity officer, as contract had expired already 12 months before this meeting, so there couldn't have been a report. The decision we then took, chairperson, was to ask an audit firm that also served as our internal auditors to do what we called ad hoc tenders assessment, and produce out of that an assurance for us that we can proceed with the award of that tender. The report came back. It was in the negative. We says, no, you can't. At that point, we then said to management, and then, of course, this happens at a meeting held in February of the following year.
2015.
the board then says, well, we have to cancel this contract, ask management to reissue the RFP.
Yes. Before we get to that, I just want to raise two issues about the meeting of the 27th of November. Mr. Buthelezi, the chairperson of the FCIP, had said to you, these are urgent and you should approve them.
That is correct, Chairperson.
What was his position on the board immediately after the meeting?
Chairperson, actually, even before we discussed this matter, he gave me a letter of resignation saying that he is resigning from the board and it would be effective immediately after that particular board meeting of the 27th of November.
Well, going back to the meeting, you clearly said that the GCEO made it clear at the meeting that the Probity report was there and it would be finished. He didn't understand why it was not part of the pack that was given to the board members. Is that right? That's what he said.
That is so, Chairperson.
Yes. Now, with regard to the then chairperson of FCIP, Mr. Buthelezi, did he also say that there was the Probity report? The Probity report was there, or did he not say that, but he didn't refute what the GCEO said?
Chairperson, he didn't say whether there was a Probity report, neither did he refute what was said by the Group CEO.
Yes.
He did not even say, over the last 12 months, we did not have a Probity officer.
Yes, yes. But as I understood your evidence, you did ask him to give you, as chairperson of this particular committee, to give you an assurance that processes had been followed. Now, whether or not processes had been followed, would that have been evident from the Probity report, or was that request separate from, that you were making to him, separate from the Probity report? Namely, give us an assurance that processes were followed. That's what you said you asked him. So my question is whether that question was going to be answered by the Probity report, or whether that question was separate from the Probity report. And if it was separate, whether he did answer you and said, yes, processes were followed, or whether he didn't answer.
The sequence was that we asked for assurance. And I recall that leading this discussion was the chair of the then our Audit and Risk Committee, Ms. Zoro Manase. And then she went on to say a Probity report, the availability of a Probity report would give us that assurance. Of course, in that discussion, Mr. Montana said, no, we can assure you we followed process. The Probity report is there. At that point, I think Mr. Buthelezi was taking guidance from the Group CEO, given that he is the chief of head of operations of the company.
And would you know whether the chairperson of the FCIP report would have been expected to have known if there was such a report before they made their decision, or whether it's possible that they could have done their job without having seen that report, seen whether it existed or didn't exist?
Chairperson, if they were applying the duty of diligence, and care, he would have, together with his team, in the meeting of the FCIP, the Finance, Capital, Investment and Procurement Committee, asked management when they presented to them this recommendation whether there had been probity. But it would seem like the committee failed to address that question.
Yes, thank you.
Can I just finish off the regard of the probity in regard to these two contracts? You say that the board asked for an audit report on these two contracts.
Yes, Chairperson.
And you then say that that report, you call it an assessment report, is annexed as PM3. If you look at the last sentence of paragraph 20 of your affidavit.
Oh, okay, yes.
Okay, can you please look at PM3, please?
Tell us what page PM3 is.
It's at page 64, Mr. Molefe. What is that document?
No, let me. The Chairperson, the document is called Ad hoc Review of Tenders, Braamfontein Depot, and Supply of Rails and Tunnels.
Yes.
Yes,
And if
thank you.
you look at the first page of the document, what is the date of that document?
The date of the document is the 15th of February, which is the date on which the board met to receive this report and to make a determination on whether to proceed or not to proceed with the tender award.
Now, it's not necessary to go through the report because the board did take a decision eventually.
That is correct.
Can I ask you...
Just one sec.
sorry.
The date, or rather what I see on page 64 is the month and the year of the report without the day, any particular date. I understood you to be linking the date of the report with a certain meeting of the board. Is that right? I thought you were saying that the date of the report is the date of a certain meeting of the board.
Let me say, Chairperson, it was during the month.
At some stage during February.
Yes.
At some stage during February.
In February.
Yes, okay.
Probably the 25th week, but we can go to the record and confirm that.
Okay.
Can I then ask you to look at page 88, the 88 on the top?
Page 88.
And then you'll see in the second last paragraph, after the numbered paragraph 15, they advise what management and the board should do. And what is the advice that's recorded there? Starting with the word overall.
Well, shouldn't we just first hear who are the authors of this report?
Yes,
Then we know
yes,
who is advising. Looks like it's the Group Chief Executive Officer, is that right? The author of the report.
Oh, who authored the report? I thought it was the special committee that the board had appointed.
No, the authors of the report were an audit firm that was providing internal audit work for Transnet. I think
For PRASA.
For PRASA, sorry. For PRASA.
Yes. Well, you are chairman of Transnet now, so. Okay, so
I have to speak for trans there.
Okay, so
No,
the document at one page of which is at page 88. Is that the page you were looking for,
Yes.
Mr. Sonny?
Yes.
Is that the document that, Mr. Molefe, you say is a report of, did you say of the firm that had been asked to prepare it?
Yes.
Okay, I was referring to the Group Chief Executive Officer simply because it seemed to me that that document ends at page 89, and I see that name there, but I see it says responsible official. So responsible official might not mean official responsible for this report, for the preparation of the report. I thought that's what it meant. It's not what it means. It's not what it means. I was seeing that where it says responsible official, and I thought it meant that that's the official who prepared the report, but you are saying, no, that's not the position.
The report was prepared by
An outside firm.
An outside firm, but it was working inside
within,
PRASA
yeah,
on a
yes.
regular basis.
Yes,
Yeah.
okay.
Because it was providing services for that internal audit function throughout.
Okay.
And Chairperson, I have not looked at the name. I've not been in PRASA for a long time, but I think it was called Sikela Abiso, I think was the company, if I remember very well. Yeah.
Okay, all right. Mr. Soni, is this clarified? So that a responsible official,
I'm going to deal with.
you'll deal with it, okay.
So can I just put the report in perspective, or ask you to put the report in perspective? At page 88, that's the one we are looking at. If you look at page 86, first of all, Mr. Molefe, page 86 of that report. Have you got it?
Yes.
You see that the heading is overall conclusion and recommendations. Do you see that?
I do
Right.
see that, Chair.
Now, we don't need to go through all of that, because I think the relevant part is, so they articulate 15 recommendations that they make, and those end at page 88.
I'm sorry, Mr. Soni. I'm really sorry to interrupt you again. Can I know where this report starts and where it ends? Because maybe
Yes.
that's where my problem is.
Yes,
I'm
sorry,
thinking a particular page is the end of the report when it
No,
might
sure.
not.
So it starts at page 64, Chairperson,
Yes. And ends where?
and it ends on page 89, but I will try through the witness to explain how 89 comes about and how it's related to the report.
Okay, 89 is the page to which I referred earlier, is that
Yes,
right?
that is the
Oh,
page.
okay, so I was right about that page being the last page.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
So, Mr. Molefe,
The reason why I was wondering whether that's where it ends is because if you go to the next page, it says 7.
Yes.
And 7 seems to follow up on 6 at page 88, and that gave me the impression that it still continues.
continuing the report.
Okay.
So, we know that this part of the report, which ends on page 88, is big paragraph 5 of the report, which is headed overall conclusion and recommendations. Would that be correct?
That is correct, Chair.
Okay. And if you look at right at the end of page 88, after the numbered paragraph 15, there are 2 paragraphs, 2 short paragraphs. Do you see that?
I do, sir.
Would you please read them into the record, and then I'm just going to ask you what you understand them to mean.
The paragraphs read as follows, Chairperson, and that is on page 88 of the annexure. It says, overall management and the board must take a decision to accept or reject the non-compliance with the policy of the two affected tenders reviewed. Then the following paragraph says, this recommendation has been discussed with the group chief executive officer, and his response and action plan is reflected below.
Right. So that is the overall recommendation to the board, I take. I see you shake your head, Mr. Molefe. Does that mean yes?
Well, it is. It is the recommendation to the board.
Okay. Then the next paragraph. Oh, sorry.
Just 1 second, Mr. Son. Are we able to have a name for this report so when we refer to it, we can know what we call it in the midst of all these documents? We can call it by the name of the authors if necessary, if it was Trabiso or whoever. What report? I just want that when we refer to it and when anybody reads the transcript, they can know what report we are talking about.
To identify what the substance is, Chairperson, I'm going to propose we call it Report on Review of Tenders.
A report on review of tenders?
Yes.
The report on review of tenders?
Yes.
Okay, all right. That's what we'll call it then. Okay, thank you.
So, can I then ask Ms. Molefe for you to turn to page 89, and what is that in relation to the report? What does that indicate?
Chairperson, that page is called Management Response and Action Plan, but fundamentally, it is a section that says there has been non-compliance and that the tenders should be cancelled.
Does it not go further and say the matter has been discussed with management and this is how management responded? If you read the response, the paragraph under the small heading response.
Chairperson, we recall that we had already referred in the preceding page to the discussion with management.
Yes.
I don't see that on this page. However,
it's on the last page, on the previous page, the last sentence.
The previous page,
yes.
that was dealt with at that point.
Yes.
So it says we have discussed, we demonstrated that there had not been compliance, and management agree with us, and that they therefore propose this action plan, which must be driven by the Chief Executive Officer, Mr. Lucky Montana, Group Chief Executive Officer.
In effect, that is summarizing what the final outcome was following the publication of the report.
That is correct, Chairperson. If I may come in, just to say that where they deal with the action plan, they state categorically that we will design alternative tender procedures to acquire the equipment and services required. Consequence management will be implemented accordingly.
Now, the last sentence at page 88, to which you also referred, Mr. Molefe, tells us that what we will find in on the next page is this Group CEO's response and action plan. You see that?
I see that, Chairperson.
Yes. Now, when one looks at the next page, it refers to we, after due consideration of the contents of this report from the Internal Audit Consortium, we are of the view that the two tenders are non-compliant and will therefore be cancelled. Is it the Group CEO speaking there that is saying that, as you understand the position?
Paragraph 6 says management response and action
plan. Yes, which suggests
I would imagine it is the Group CEO,
yes,
but talking as part of the collective.
Yes, yes. Okay. No, I just wanted to understand that, because the language seemed to suggest to me that maybe the committee is still speaking, even though it says management response. But I think probably I'm mistaken, because later on it says we will design alternative tender procedures to acquire the equipment. That must be management.
Chairperson, it is the management team that says
yes,
that
is talking, yes,
by the Group CEO.
Yes.
And because the board committee or the internal audit firm can't be the one that designs
yes, of course.
These procedures to acquire this. And secondly, the committee would not have taken a view on who should be the responsible officer.
Yes. So that responsible official that was confusing me earlier must be meaning that's the official who will be responsible for the implementation of this action plan.
That is correct. The owner of the business.
The owner of the okay, thank you.
Now, following the publication of this report in February, or the acceptance of this report seemingly both by the board and management, what happened?
Well, Chairperson, I did say that at that meeting, given the recommendation and because there is a detailed report of the internal auditors, I think this bundle must be contained in that. The board concurred that it was not the kind of a tender we could proceed with, that a new RFP needed to be issued as a matter of urgency to invite participants. Of course, I must say, Chairperson, that at that time, the GCE, well, he would have been back in February, but he had gone on leave, as I indicated earlier on, that he needed a rest.
So, did you then cancel the tender? Did the board cancel the tender?
The board cancelled the tender, Chairperson, but the directors and the board censured the conduct of the Group CEO, that he had misled the board when he assured the board that there was a probity report, when in fact he should have known that there was no such a report, because the probity officer had not been in place for the period of approximately 12 months.
So can I just ask you, in regard to that issue, Mr. Molefe, there is no probity officer for 12 months. That's what you are told.
Yes.
Mr. Montana assures you that there is a probity report.
Yes.
You then find out in December that there is no probity officer. In terms of the assurance that Mr. Montana had given you, what conclusion did you arrive? In other words, had he made a mistake? What was his state of mind in making that representation to you about the probity report?
Chairperson, the only conclusion one can draw is that the group CEO deliberately misled the board because he wanted the board to rapidly approve a tender that was seriously flawed. Because even after it was found that the tender process was flawed, he never came to apologize to the board for that. And that is why the board said there is a need to enforce good corporate governance in the light of this gross dereliction of duty by the executive management team, at the head of whom was the group CEO.
Did the board, after it had been informed by Ms. Ngoyi that, one, there wasn't any probity report, and two, there couldn't have been any probity report because there'd been no probity officer for 12 months, did the board at any stage confront the group CEO and say, CEO, you told us there was a probity report. You know how important that report would have been. Why did you tell us there was a probity report when, in fact, there was no probity report? And if the board did, obviously not necessarily in those terms, but in effect, and if the board did, what was his answer?
My recollection is that the board did so. The excuse of the group CEO is that he was misled. He was told that there was that probity report. There was no explanation as to how the probity report could have been there if there was no probity officer for 12 months.
Yes, but am I wrong to think that the way he had given the assurance to the board that there was a probity report gave one the impression that it's a document that he had seen, or am I being unfair to him?
Chairperson, if, and the record had shown, there was no probity officers for 12 months preceding the recommended tender, there was no way in which he could have seen a probity report, because where would it have come from? Unless it's a concoction of somebody else, it couldn't have been a proper probity report. And besides, the internal audit company would have been aware of that probity report themselves, as they are the ones who have to advise on the preparation of financial statements, which ultimately become part of the Auditor General report. So it couldn't have been that he had seen the report. One can talk at length about these things, but the conclusion that one can ask is that, I can arrive at, is that the group CEO and management most likely were used to the board of directors, which did not interrogate issues to the extent that this board was doing. So all that you needed to do is to write good English, do a presentation in a very articulate way, and say, I recommend that you approve, and the board would just approve. Yeah.
Thank you.
May I ask, and I want to return to that issue in a moment, Chairperson, because but it is an important issue.
It is quite important.
Yes.
It is
but I'll return to it in a moment, because I just want to deal with other developments that took place at that time. Now, forgetting Mr. Montana's state of mind and what you believed prompted him to misrepresent the position to you, what steps did the board take in regard to Mr. Montana's powers following the cancellation of the tenders?
Again, we need to put in context, Chairperson, these steps. The context is that we now are in a possession of the letter from Mr. Montana that says, don't extend my contract, I am leaving.
Yes.
Then the immediate thing that exercises the mind of the board is that we now know that things can go grossly wrong with the business. It would not be proper to keep the group CEO, who has already told us he's leaving, with all the delegated authority of a group CEO. That's one point. The second one was, we also did an assessment and concluded that the office of the group CEO was just too powerful. The group CEO was the group CEO of PRASA. He was the chairman of Autopex. He was chairman of Intersight. And so we said, we think that we took a decision that we were withdrawing him as the chairperson to allow those subsidiaries to operate in an autonomous way and account for their sins to the board of control of the group. But we also said that we're going to curtail the authority of the group CEO in respect of procurement, that procurement that he intends proceeding with will have to be approved by the board. He needs to report on all of these instances. And basically we're saying things must change. There's a new board. It has got its own new style of governance. It's important for management, including the group CEO, to adjust to this style of management of the board, style of governance, sorry.
Is that what you conveyed to Mr. Montana?
I did.
Now,
one second, Mr. Sonny. Just to understand where the board was at this stage. So the board had an incident, or maybe not an incident, had a situation where the GCEO, it had asked the GCEO for various contracts, and the GCEO had not provided with those contracts, and the board had to go outside of PRASA to get a presentation that satisfied the board. Two, it had the same GCEO had given the board an assurance on a very important issue that turned out to be wrong. At that stage, after these two situations which had happened, what was the board's attitude of, or towards, or understanding of the type of CEO PRASA had?
The concern of the board was that it had a group CEO who could mislead the board any time of the day, but who could also withhold information from the board. But that being the case, we had to deal with the reality, chairperson, that I mean, in the normal, things being normal, one would have said, why didn't you just fire the person instantly? But I had already referred to earlier on to the assessment made by the Audit and Risk Committee that said the organization is broken, it's dysfunctional. Departments and people who are there don't have the requisite skills to do what they are supposed to do. That's one point. The second point is that we were aware that in any event, the person is leaving. But we don't readily have a person to fill that position, and we're going out to search for an appropriate group CEO. So we say, well, we will live with this situation provided we introduce certain strictures, certain controls, amongst which would have been that one of reducing the delegation of authority and certain conditions on not going out to issue tenders without the approval of the board.
Okay.
So that's how we were looking at it at the time.
Yes, okay. So had it not been for the fact that he was about to leave anyway, it may be that the board might have considered whether it should take any disciplinary action against him.
Ordinarily, Chairperson,
Yes.
that is what the board would have had to consider, given its own responsibilities.
Okay.
Chairperson, I see it's 1 o'clock. We're going to get into an
Yes. I think let's take this lunch adjournment and we'll resume at 2 o'clock. We adjourn.
Was getting too worried.